For the past 4 weeks, we've been taking a close look at a series of talks given by John Paul II that have come to be known as Theology, the Body. And this is part of a series of homilies that will most likely take us up to Halloween, maybe a little bit longer than that. I'm nearly finished working out all the planning for this series of homilies, and that's good because I need to start working on the third volume of my book and have it ready for Christmas. But anyways, regardless, it's going to take either 5 or 6 more homilies to get through all of this. The Theology of the Body, in case you've missed the previous homilies, are perhaps the most significant teaching given to us by any pope within the last century or so. It takes a Catholic look at the human person, the human body, love, relationships, sexuality, family, and marriage. And all of this is based off of what God has revealed to us in sacred scripture. And so in this series of homilies, we did sort of an introduction to the topic, and then we discussed some of the major concepts introduced by St. John Paul, original solitude, original unity, original nakedness, original sin, and shame. And last week we talked about changing our heart, what John Paul II refers to as our ethos, sort of our worldview. And all these concepts build upon one another, so if you've missed out on them, maybe take a look at my previous homilies on my YouTube channel. This week we're going to be talking about the practical ways in which we can begin to change our ethos, the ethos that is, tempted by sin, it tempts us to look at others with lust or with indifference. And these practical measures can be divided basically into 2 categories. First, we're going to look at the ways in which God helps us to change our ethos, and then second, we're going to look at the effort that we ourselves need to put into to change our ethos. And it requires both. It requires both God's help and our own cooperation. So let's start with God's grace. John Paul II says there are 3 indispensable and infallible means of grace. 3 indispensable and infallible ways in which God helps us along the way, telling us that we're not alone in our struggle to love correctly, to love well. Indispensable, meaning you can't love well without these 3 things. And infallible in the sense that they work every time. They cannot fail. These 3 things are prayer, confession, and the Eucharist. The number 1 indispensable and infallible means of grace to live life of love is prayer. Serious sin and serious prayer cannot coexist at the same time. Eventually, one will defeat the other. It's basically just what our gospel just said. No servant can serve 2 masters who either hate one or love the other, or be devoted to one and despise the other. Eventually, one will kill the other. And we can allow serious sin to kill our prayer life. I see this with former students of mine who go off to college and they totally change their way of life, their morality, everything about them, and they completely cease to pray. They stop going to church altogether. And this is just the reality of what happens. Or we can overcome that sin with our prayer. And it could be a week, it could be a month, it could be 4 decades, it could be the rest of your life. But we have to keep praying in order for God to free us from a sin that you might struggle with, or that sin will defeat you. Even when you're completely discouraged, we need to make that commitment. I will never give up serious prayer. I'll never stop coming back to God's help. I can't do it without Him. Which leads us to the number 2 indispensable and infallible mean of grace to live a life of love, and that is confession. Every one of us is going to fail to love correctly at some point. But when we fail, when we fall into the confessional. God gave us the sacrament of confession not because He didn't want us to use it or because He didn't think we would need it. It's because He knew that we would need it. And He wanted us to use it. It's not there to punish us or to shame us. It's there to heal us. And then the number 3 indispensable, infallible means of grace to live a life of love is the Eucharist. And this is particularly important because we're talking about theology of the body. And every single time the priest says, "This is my body given for you," we're coming back to that truth that I talked about a couple of weeks ago, that the flesh, the body, is the hinge of our salvation. that God's grace comes to us in and through our bodies. God saved us by offering his body on the cross. So when you go to Mass, you see God truly in the flesh. When you receive Holy Communion, your body comes into contact with his. And you can't come into contact with God without being transformed by him in some way. So that is the grace that we need to live well, to love well, to change our heart, change our ethos, prayer, confession, and the Eucharist. But in addition to grace, we need grit. You could think of it that way. We need to put in the effort to change our perspective, to change our ethos. God doesn't just sort of, wave a magic wand and cure you all of a sudden of all of the temptations you've ever faced. It takes practice. Teams don't make it to state without putting in the work ahead of time, both before and during the season. Think of life like that. You hear it from a lot of people nowadays. You hear them say things like, well, love is love. Love should be easy. Love should be natural. Love should be spontaneous. I love love. I love this person. So I should just be able to love them naturally and without any effort, without training. And this is a mistake that young people are tricked into making. I should be able to love whoever I want, whenever I want. But they're so wounded by this way of thinking and this way of living that they don't even realize that it's the cause of their misery when it comes to relationships. They keep going back to bad ones. What if you had a friend who, say, had a passion for airplanes? You go over to his house, they have a bunch of posters of airplanes on their walls, coffee table books full of all types of airplanes going back all the way to the Wright brothers. They have all kinds of model airplanes. They know everything about airplanes. And then one day, that friend calls you and he says, hey, there's this pilot that I know, and he says that I could borrow his plane this morning. Take it out for a spin. Do you want to come with me? And of course you wouldn't, because this person doesn't have any training, no matter how much he knows about the airplane. No matter how passionate they are, you're not going up in an airplane without somebody that has had extensive training. And if that's the case when it comes to flying, how much more serious would it be when it comes to how we live? How much more serious should it be when it comes to love and relationships? Just because I'm passionate about a person or a relationship doesn't mean that I'm actually able to love them as they deserve to be loved. Not with original sin in the picture anyways. Just because we might be passionate about a relationship doesn't mean that we've been trained to love well. I want to get into a relationship with this person, but I don't actually know how to love them. John Paul II says that if we are to have the freedom to truly love correctly, it has to first pass through the path of renunciation. Love has to first pass through the path of renunciation. What he means by that is that in order to love someone correctly, I have to have the ability to say no to myself first. I have to discipline myself. So how do we do that? Well, because of sin and the hardness of our hearts, my heart wants to either be indifferent to people or to use people. So what does discipline look like in that regard? Well, the first practical thing that we can address is that in so many ways, what passes into our heart first comes to us through our eyes. What comes out of our heart passes through our actions. And so if I'm going to actually love people differently, I have to look at people differently, to see them differently. And this is a part of the practical training of loving well. Now, both men and women are broken by sin, and sometimes we're very similar in that brokenness, but sometimes we're very different, and I'm going to be painting in broad strokes here. So when I say guys are like this or girls are like this, these are generalizations, obviously. Everyone's a little bit different, tempted by different things. But I'll start with the guys. So guys, if we want to transform our hearts, if we want to change our ethos, our perspective when we look at another person, we need to discipline our eyes. Where we look, what we look at, and what we focus on. Here's a practical example. So a few years ago, my friends and I took a short 3-day vacation to Branson, Missouri. There were 4 of us. 2 of us were priests. 1 was a married man, and the other one was a single man. We were all within a year of each other in age. We were all in the seminary together. We stayed on this really nice golf course in this condo. It was awesome. One of the days we were there, We went to Table Rock Lake and we rented a 32-foot pontoon boat for the afternoon. It was sweet. It had 250 horsepower Mercury motor on it. We took that thing 50 miles an hour down Table Rock Lake all the way to the Arkansas border. But before we left the marina, one of the workers had to come on board to go through all the safety drills, where we were allowed to, to go on the lake, where the no wake zones were, how to dock it, etc. And she left, and one of my non-priest friends said, "I did not hear a single word she said." And I was like, "What do you mean?" And then she said this and this, and I started going through her whole spiel, and he's like, "Yeah, I couldn't concentrate on any of that." Apparently, she wasn't wearing very much. And summer in Branson, Missouri, working in a marina, I guess it shouldn't have been surprising, but I hadn't noticed. And then when I said that, my friend Scott looked at me and he said, "You're such a good priest." And the moral of the story is that we need to practice. Men, when you talk to women, and this is going to be awkward at first, even when you're not talking to women, look them in the eyes. Or if that's too awkward for you, maybe slightly above their eyes. I don't know. And that has to come from our own self-motivation. A woman is not going to be coaching you to do this. You're not going to be, "Oh, congratulations for not looking at me like an object," right? "Oh, good job." That's not how it works. Practicing this is for our benefit as men, for the role of cultivating and protecting the garden, as God did with Adam as part of the training. Now, if you were to tell 16-year-old me that I would ever be able to not notice the revealing outfit of a very attractive marina worker, I would have been quite shocked. I probably wouldn't have believed you. But it has taken decades and decades of practice. And I promise you that it's possible. You are greater than the sum of your temptations. That the male heart has been broken by sin in this way to see women as objects. And objects are meant to be used. They're not meant to be loved. The goal is that we want to see the whole person, not just the parts. So we need to practice, starting right now. Look her in the eyes. And I also want to make this clear, the story was in no way of, a round of self-congratulations for me. If I wasn't affected and tempted by sin, I wouldn't have to focus on looking them in the eyes. But the training is there to avoid the temptation. If I were truly free, perfectly virtuous, I wouldn't even need to be tempted ever. But I know myself better than that. And the same thing is true with women. Of course, I can't personally vouch for how women think or how they might be generally tempted because I'm not one. But as a priest and as a brother and as a once upon a time boyfriend even, I can offer a little bit of perspective. Once again, we're painting in broad strokes here, generalizations. Whereas guys are tempted to objectify women's bodies, women are tempted to objectify their idea of what that man is supposed to be like. And what I mean by this is that you see the guy and they look a certain way, and instantly you imagine what having a relationship with him is going to be like, what his name is, what your kids are going to be named, the kind of house that you're going to live in. You imagine what life is going to be like with him. And so you're bending the idea of this person to your will. You are desiring that he be a certain kind of way, and then you expect him to be a certain kind of way. And when he's not, well, the relationship gets rocky. Here's a practical example, just yesterday. So my entire 8th grade class is only girls, and so it's amazing what a class of only girls will talk about versus classes that are mixed together. But they were talking about their plans for Halloween. And one of them said that her perfect Halloween would be inviting this boy that she likes to go to a haunted house because when she gets scared, she could jump into his arms. And she was objectifying him. She was projecting this image of a manly protector on what I assume is like a 14 or 15-year-old kid. And I guarantee you that that's not how that boy would interpret that, unless he has trained himself with the practice that I've been talking about. The temptation for him is going to be to use her rather than to protect her. Mothers and fathers, you need to tell your daughters and your sons these kind of things. You need to be training your sons to be virtuous at a far younger age than you probably realize. Both responses, male and female, tend to objectify the other person. Sometimes it's objectifying their bodies, sometimes it's objectifying the idea of who they should be. My brother, after he got divorced, he shared a pretty keen insight with me. He said, If there's one thing I learned from marriage, it's that men go into relationships thinking that the woman will never change, and women go into relationships expecting him to change. And both perspectives are broken in their expectations. One objectifies the woman's body, the woman's beauty, and the other objectifies the idea of what her man ought to be in her mind. We need to meet somewhere in the middle. Here's a true story that sort of gives us the ideal response, not just looking the woman in the eyes, the ideal response to beauty. This is a true story. Two bishops were walking out of a church together at the exact same moment a brothel worker was walking by down the street. And let's just say that she was dressed for work. And it was well known what she did for a living. And one of the bishops, averted his eyes, looked in the other direction, kind of like a kid when the scene comes on in the movie, your mom tells you to cover your eyes. And that's not a bad thing, to look away from temptation, to avoid it altogether. That is one way to train ourselves. The other bishop, however, looked right at this woman as she walked by. And the other bishop was like, "Stop staring." But as he turned toward his brother bishop, he saw that there were tears in his eyes. And eventually, the teary-eyed bishop said, "How tragic it is that such beauty has been sold to the lusts of men." How tragic it is that such beauty has been sold to the lusts of men. When he looked at this woman, he saw her. When he looked at her, he could see the person. So the moral of the story, well, which bishop was right? They both were. There are times in our life where we have to look away, where we have to remove the temptation, where we have to separate ourselves from it. We know our heart, and we know where we can and can't go with our heart. We have to look away. But eventually, the goal is to not simply look away. The goal is to actually see the person in front of me. The goal is to train my eyes so much that my heart is actually conformed to the truth of the person before me. I'm not indifferent. I'm not tempted to use another person for my benefit or look after them lustfully. And you can use someone just by looking at them. To affirm the dignity of another person is a choice. It's not bad to be drawn toward beauty. We're drawn to what is attractive to us, and we'll be talking about this in greater detail next week. But for now, just keep it in mind that God is not asking us to kill that desire or that passion in our hearts, but to direct it correctly. Recognizing beauty, physical or otherwise beauty, in another person is an amazing thing. It's the thing that we do with that beauty that makes the difference. Do we recognize that beauty and appreciate that person for their own sake, or do we recognize the beauty and want to take it for ourselves? My friend Scott, the same Scott that told me I was a good priest for not looking at that chick, but my friend Scott always gives this advice on the high school retreats that we direct every February. He tells the guys, when you see a beautiful woman, and he's selling this in the course of his own vacation story, how he met his wife. But he says, when you see a beautiful woman, do three things. Number one, recognize her beauty. Don't pretend that she's not beautiful. That doesn't reflect reality, and it will get you into trouble with her. Number two, thank God for her beauty immediately. Because when you make the conscious effort to do that, you turn her beauty into a form of prayer. You are seeing her as a child of God made in his image. And number three, when you see a beautiful woman, recognize her beauty, thank God for her beauty. Number three, thank God for your vocation. In other words, thank God for the path that he has given you in life. As I tell my students, practice makes permanent, not perfect. If you want to grow in virtue, you have to practice doing the right things. If you want to grow in vice, you can do that too, simply by practicing vice. Practice makes permanent. It does not make perfect. For practice to make perfect, you have to practice perfectly. You can very nearly ruin your golf swing just by practicing the wrong way. And that practice has to start frustratingly small at times. You aren't going to all of a sudden going to be free from all temptation the first week you begin trying. As our gospel says today, the person who is trustworthy in very small matters is also trustworthy in great ones. The person who is dishonest in small matters is also dishonest in great ones. So the way we practice is going to determine our results in both big and small things. We need to start small. If we practice badly, we will act badly. So we start with the small matters in simply the way that we look at other people. Back to the story of the bishops and the brothel worker. The woman noticed the two bishops. Kind of hard to miss, really. Two bishops standing around outside. But she noticed the bishop that looked at her, and she expected to see judgment in his eyes. But instead, she saw something that she had never seen before in a man's eyes. She was used to being used. She was used to being looked on as an object. But she realized this is someone who sees something else when they look at me. And this one encounter with genuine love is all that it took for her. She tracked that bishop down. He shared the gospel with her. She became a Christian. The bishop is now known as Saint Nonus, and the prostitute is now known as Saint Pelagia. And this is a true story, the power of what a loving gaze can do, a gaze that is not indifferent, that doesn't desire to use the other. This man could look at this woman in this way because this is how Jesus looks at her. This is how God looks at her. And that's possible for all of us to do. Blessed are those who are pure of heart, for they shall see God. It's the famous beginning to the Beatitudes. When you're pure of heart, in other words, you will see God in every single person. Mature Christian purity gives the ability to see God in the human body. And at first, purifying our heart might mean having to look away, but ultimately that's not the end. Looking away is acknowledging that we are attracted to lusts, that we are tempted by it, but we're working toward all of that being untwisted in our hearts to the point where we can simply love people for their own sake. Not possess them, not use them, but simply affirm that they exist because they're made in the image of God. And then we can eventually actually protect them. That was God's original plan. Adam was put in the garden to cultivate and to guard. The people that are put into our lives, we can guard with our actions if we see them as they truly are. And if you ever find yourself in a place where you keep failing and struggling to love the right way, to look at people the right way, remember it's not just about discipline. Above all, it's about grace. And we've been given those three indispensable and infallible means of grace. If you fail, just keep praying. If you fall into the confessional. And if you feel empty, come to Jesus and fill yourself with the Eucharist.